Welcome back to my discussion with Rick Wagoner, right here in the heart of the Renaissance Center, the corporate headquarters for GM. Rick, let's talk about one of the other changes that you just made from a management structure standpoint. You are now chairman and CEO, which you've always been, but you moved Fritz Henderson up into president and COO. That's more of a traditional structure that GM had. You always had chairman and president. Why did you move Fritz into this position, and how does it start freeing you up to do other things?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, John. It is the structure of the company I remember since the early days. We got away from it for a while, frankly, because the pressing problems we had in restructuring North America, I knew it was really going to pretty much take most of my full attention anyway. But the reason we made the move right now is I think as the world gets bigger, our sales get spread more and more around the world. We're in the midst of a massive technology change. And I think these required, frankly, a little more strength, bulk, more people to cover the activities at the top of the company. And we had the perfect guy for the job. I mean, Fritz, as you know, has, I think uniquely in our history, run 3 of the 4 automotive regions, all of them outside of North America.
i.e. South America, Asia, Pacific, and Europe.
Right. And then came over to be CFO for the last couple of years and did a terrific job. And I've really been privileged to work closely with Fritz. I think we work well together. And so I think, to be honest, having sort of 2 of us, along with Bob as well in the product, and Bob provides a lot of business perspective, really to cover the bases, whether it's making sure we're getting out to China enough or making sure our voice is heard in this public debate as we go forward on energy and the environment. We have a lot of opportunities and I think certain responsibility. And I think the structure is going to free up more time for all of us, and particularly me, to maybe be a little more proactive in those areas.
So it sounds like you're going to spend more time on a plane and more time in Washington, D.C.
Well, I think probably some of that, and maybe more time on some of our new technologies too, because as we've talked about from time to time, changing to some of these new technologies does require not just that the auto companies do something different, but there's really a system issue. I mean, infrastructure, regulatory environments, and we need to make sure we provide our voice in a logical and cost-efficient way to move along that path, because it's a I think it's a unique time in the history of the industry, and GM is a big player, needs to make sure we provide our input in the best way.
You're working on everything: flex fuel, diesel, fuel cell, plug-in hybrid, electric, all that stuff. What's your gut feel? Where do you think it's really going to end up?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, John, a fairly long period while that question sorts itself out. And I think the best guess today is the end point will be that we won't end up with a single answer, because what you find is almost each of those technologies you mentioned is the optimal one for specific circumstances. For example, if you have a vehicle that spends most of its time in a city environment, then a hybrid or electric really makes a lot of sense. If you're in a vehicle that drives the open road a lot, hard to beat the internal gas combustion engine. So I think diesel if you're doing a lot of towing and hauling. So my point is, at least for a while, I think we're going to be running on all these paths. And from a GM perspective, I feel like we need to be, right at the top in the understanding of these technologies and the application of them, even though some of them for a while are obviously not going to be big money makers. It's about getting ready for the future.
One of the things I read a quote of you recently saying is that the United States is way behind in battery technology. Did I read that right? And talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think other parts of the world, particularly Asia, and I think particularly Japan, have focused more government resources on things like battery research. And I think they have become the production hubs, whether it's Japan or China, of a lot of the batteries used in the world today, whether it's for cell phone usage or otherwise. In that sense, I do think from a U.S. perspective, we had fallen behind. Good news, as we get into some of these new technologies like lithium-ion, we have some really smart people here in startups coming up with some great new technologies. What specifically I was addressing in that discussion was a concern that, so once we get the chemistry right, we have to be able to ramp up and produce these batteries in high volume, at high quality, in a cost-efficient way. And that's an area that I think probably is going to require more support than we've seen, for example, from our government historically.
Does it matter you know, where the batteries come from. I mean, I think your latest announcement is with Hitachi out of Japan. I mean, you can go buy what you need wherever you want to. Isn't that how it can work?
It can, although buying stuff from Japan today looks a little more expensive with the dollar valued as it is. So, you know, there's that issue. But, I mean, the direct answer to your question is, yeah. I mean, we do play globally, and we source, you know, globally, and we need to go get the best, highest quality, right technology components from around the world. You know, I think as someone who lives in Detroit's an American citizen, I think from a U.S. perspective, this is one of the future technologies we don't want the country to fall behind on. So from that perspective, I think the U.S. has the chance to get back into that game as well as into other technologies, and I think it's in the interest of all of us for that to happen.
Will GM do that? I mean, Toyota claims, I think, it has something like 300 engineers working on battery technology. Would you go to that kind of a level?
I don't rule it out. To be honest, I don't want to give you a number today, but we have a lot more engineers working on batteries today than we did even 2 years ago. And as we you know, wrestle with the reality of a new technology battery and supporting suppliers and integrate it into these new vehicles that we're working on, like for example, the Chevy Volt, we've really thickened up our resource base there. And
will you go to Toyota's level, do you think?
Well, I wouldn't rule it out. Let me just say at this point, we're ramping up quickly, and part of our challenge has been making sure we can find the engineers who are skilled in that field, which, you know, I think is a good example of an opportunity for us to really continue to grow. We can also, you know, source some of the engineers from our centers around the world, too, so we do look at this globally, but we've been ramping up quite a bit here in the U.S.
Well, good. Let's take another break. We'll be right back talking with Rick Wagoner about what's going on at General Motors.
Stay tuned. Autoline returns right after this.